The title, Gather My Saints Unto Me, of course, is drawn from that marvellous Armageddon psalm, Psalm 50. Shall I read it to you, the first 6 verses? So, the mighty God, even Yahweh, hath spoken. Called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down of thereof. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God hath shined. Our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. He shall call to the heavens from above and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God to judge himself. It's an Armageddon psalm. It has the title Aeon in it, brothers and sisters. And whenever you find that title used 48 times in the Old Testament, it occurs 4 times. First of all, in Genesis 14. Genesis 14 is the chapter where we first read about Armageddon and the establishment of the kingdom of God. It's always drawn. That title is used, it's always drawn, Genesis 14. We're not going to go into that, of course. We have something else to do here today, and I'm going to see if this works. In fact, so we'll see how we go. Because I've got another thing here, I've got to press the same button. Now, Brother Phil, of course, referred to Proverbs 29 and verse 18. A few verses more important in relation to this subject, because it's very plain, isn't it, that without a vision, the people perish. And I want to just show you the words that are used here, because those words are very important. The word vision is chazam in the Hebrew. It means mental sight, from chazam, to gaze at. And what God has given to us, brothers and sisters, that the animals don't have, we believe, is the ability to create pictures on what we might call the screen of our mind. You can create those pictures. And the pictures, of course, that the word produces are wonderful. They're astonishing. They're so clear. And if you've got that, then you can avoid the consequences of nakedness, spiritual nakedness, because that's the next word, isn't it? That word perish there. Para means to loosen, to expose, to dismiss. Brother Ham says that people is let loose. That's okay. But Young's literal, I think, has hit the nail on the head. Without a vision is a people made naked. And of course, the Lord warned in Revelation 16, behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked. He means spiritually naked, and they see his shame. And so, brothers and sisters, this is why this study is so important to us. Now, what we have on the screen, I'll give you the overview first of all, is the ages of human history. So as you can see there, we've got the beginning, the creation, going right through to when God is all and in all. We're going to be focusing on that period we call the Jubilee period, 50 period, but then we're going to narrow it right down to the first 10 years of that Jubilee period. This is the reason why we've handed out some notes, with some diagrams and information on it, because I'm not going to be able to do more than just focus on the first few years after the resurrection of the dead. And we did this back in 1979-80 and produced the book called Events Subsequent to the Return of Christ. We had 40 studies. I got 4, all right? So you get a bit of an idea of how we're going to have to just pick and choose. But what I've chosen to do is, rather than go into a lot of detail and technical things, which is what you have to do with this subject, I'm going to focus on the personal. Things that are really important to you and me in the very near future. All right? We're going to have to face these things. We have to face the judgment seat of Christ, all of us, those of us who are responsible. So we're going to focus on that, just that first 10 years and just maybe 3 or 4 years into that 10 years. So we'll do our best to give you a little bit of an overview, first of all, and to see where that leads us. So here's the millennium. It's bounded on either end by a period of time. First one, we believe, can be determined to be 50 years, called the Jubilee period. it's quite likely that the end of this will also be a 50-year period when the rule of the saints is withdrawn and mankind are left to their own devices, basically. And we know what's going to happen. Typical of human nature, the bulk of mankind will rebel against the rule of Christ. You know, God has a principle. Nobody gets immortal life without being tested. You've got to be tested to see if you're faithful under pressure. Well, what pressure do people in the kingdom age have who were born during the millennium? What pressure do you think they've got? They've got perfect rulers, a virtually perfect environment. Most of the curse has been lifted from them. You're not allowed to commit evil because if you do, you put out of business straight away. What test is there? Well, if you read Revelation 20 very carefully, it'll give you the clue, the hint. Because it talks about those at the first resurrection and judgment who were beheaded for the witness of Christ. Well, how many have been beheaded? John the Baptist? Maybe Paul? How many do you know that have been beheaded that will be at the first resurrection? I don't know too many, but there will be a lot. There will be a lot at the second resurrection and judgment, as the hint is given that the rebels will go around and seek support to overthrow the rule of Christ and the saints. And if you don't go along with them, they will use the only instruments that they have to kill people. You know what they are? Axes and scythes, the things you used in harvesting. You don't join us, you'll lose your head. That's their test. Are they prepared to die in order to have life? Which is exactly where we are. We're prepared to lose what this world offers, as it were, to die out of the world for the future life. That's the issue that we'll face then, brothers and sisters, at the end of the millennium. So, look, we could go on about that, but I wasn't even intending to talk. Anyway. So here we've got millennium. We've got the 50-year period at the beginning when flesh is subdued. We have flesh bound for 1,000 years, and we have, of course, the little season at the end where flesh is unleashed, and the end result of that, of course, is that after the second resurrection and judgment, we have the end of all flesh upon earth that could rebel against our God. And God will be all and in all. So, brothers and sisters, I want to just now very briefly give you an overview of the time periods here. This is why we've given you that sheet of paper. It's got some clues in relation to this. But here's some quotations from Brother Thomas. In Eureka, Volume 1, page 187, he says, a period of 40 years in which some of the most important events of the apocalypse are to be transacted. He adds to that, in Eureka, these words. Referring to the little open scroll in Revelation chapter 10 in the hand of the angel, he says, a scroll extended gives us the idea of length. So, when you go back to chapter 5 of Revelation, you've got a long, very long scroll. But he says, but no, the one in Revelation 10 is a little scroll. A little scroll is a short time in which things written therein are to be accomplished, a period, say, of 40 years, according to the testimony of Micah 7:14 to 17. And that passage tells us that the second Exodus under Elijah will be the same duration as the first Exodus under Moses. Okay, so we know that there's a long period there. And that 40-year period, of course, is the period of divine judgment on the earth. He goes on to say this. These 40 years will be the most important and terrible of the world's history. They are the period of the world's transition from what it calls self-government to the government of Christ and his brethren. The most noteworthy developments of this transition period are depicted in the 14th part of the 16th and the 17th and the 18th and 19th part of the 20th chapters of the Apocalypse. So that section of the Apocalypse deals with that period of time. Now, most of you, of course, are familiar with Revelation chapter 10 and the vision of the mighty rainbowed angel. And it's unfolding there on the screen. And you can see that little scroll in the hand of the angel. That's the most important thing there in that vision, that little scroll. So John is invited in Revelation 10 to approach the angel, to take that scroll out of the angel's hand and to eat it. When was the last time you ate newspaper? We don't eat paper, do we, really? He had to eat it. Why? Well, you see, it had to be part of him. Just like when you eat food, it becomes part of you. So the contents of that scroll, which contained the judgments in that 40-year period of time, he had to take on board, make part of himself. And that, brothers and sisters, is something that we've all got. He's a representative of you and me. And Brother Thomas makes this comment about that scroll. He says in Eureka Volume 3, this little scroll is the most important fragment of the apocalypse. It contains the catastrophe of the plot, without which all the rest would be of little interest to the believer. So it's a very important document, isn't it? You and I, as it were, need to approach the angel, say, look, I want to be involved. I want to be there. I want to see this world cleaned up. I want to see the wickedness of mankind swept away. I want to see the glory of Zion. Please, give me that scroll. I want to consume it. I want to make it part of myself. That's what this study is really all about. Making it the one object, the one thing in life to which you are pressing towards because you want to be there. So, that's a little bit of an overview of where we're proposing to go. And so what we have here is we've got this pattern of the 50 years. We've got the resurrection of Christ over there on the left-hand side. We have the judgment seat, which we're going to find out is just for 12 months. Right? The actual judgment process is just 12 months. Then we have what we call the marriage of the Lamb. And then we've got Armageddon, the vertical red line. Okay? And we believe that that's a 10-year period. And you can demonstrate that. And I'm going to actually ask you, if you haven't done this little exercise, I'm going to ask you to actually look at chapter 2 of Brother Sully's book, Temple, Ezekiel's Prophecy. He explains it. And when I've done this before, brethren have come to me and said, I'm not sure about that. I said, look, don't take my word for it. Go and read Brother Sully. Do your own study. Every one of them comes back and says, he's right. Yeah, I think he is right. There will be a 50-year period overall. We know there's a 40-year period of judgment from Armageddon. That's obviously at the back end. So you've got a 10-year period up front. So even if Christ comes today, Armageddon's still 10 years away. A lot of things can happen in 10 years, can't it? And right at the end of our study, we're going to talk about that 10-year period. It's called a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation on earth. Okay, so what that will lead to, of course, at the time of Armageddon is Yahweh Sabaoth, he who will be armies, unleashed upon the world, manifested in power for 40 years, but their glory will not be seen, will be withdrawn or drawn in until the evening time, the end of the judgment period. But prior to Armageddon, certain things begin. So Elijah's work starts before Armageddon, probably, I believe, 3.5 years before Armageddon. He and many saints will go out to warn the Jews. They won't be listened to, but they will warn the Jews of what's coming. There's also, of course, the work of the second Exodus that will follow beyond Armageddon. And we've got the work of the subduing of the Arab nations in the Sinaitic region in preparation for Armageddon. That's also a work of Christ and the saints prior to Armageddon. And Isaiah 19 tells us that there's the work of the beginning of the smiting and healing of Egypt that begins before Armageddon. There's quite a few things that the saints are going to be involved before the divine judgments come. So, we can look forward to some involvement in that. And of course, Armageddon's going to produce a series of outcomes. You're going to have Judah saved and settled in the land, Judah being the Jews in the land, of course. You're going to have the burial of Gog, the land cleansed and divided. You're going to have a mid-heaven proclamation for 10 years. Mid-heaven means that the saints will go out to give a message to both governments and to people, the ordinary hoi polloi on the earth. That's why it's mid-heaven, see? If you told the governments today but they need to tell their people that Christ is in the earth and you've got to submit to him. What do you reckon the governments would do? Well, they wouldn't tell their people, would they? No. So that's why the message has got to go to rulers and ruled, so that no one's got an excuse. No one can say, well, nobody told me about that. They'll have no reason to say they weren't told. So mid-heaven proclamation is the work of the saints. It's a quiet period. Then it's going to get pretty rough. 10 years after Armageddon, Rome will be destroyed. Papacy go down the gurgler, and they will have to rebuild in Central Europe, and then judgment's 30 years, the hour of judgment of Revelation will be poured out upon them. Catholic Europe will be destroyed in that 30-year period. Britain, of course, and other sensible nations will have submitted to Christ much earlier than that, post-Armageddon, and they will get involved in the building of the temple, just like in the days of old, days of Solomon. And when the papacy is destroyed in 2060, 2060, as it will, right? It's only 36 years away, right? Don't tell me that Christ isn't near. It's 36 years away. So here we've got a termination point. When the harlot system has been exposed for what she is, that's when Christ reveals his bride to the world, the true bride. So that's when you hold the marriage supper. Like our marriages today, isn't it? You have the marriage in the hall and then you wait a few hours before you can actually sit down to a meal. Does that happen here? Well, yeah, that's the pattern. You've got the marriage of the Lamb just after the glorification of the saints, right? But you've got the marriage supper when the saints are revealed in all their glory to all the world. So there's a little bit of an idea of what we've got in front of us, brothers and sisters and young people. And all nations will submit to the rule of Christ. So that's my overview. That's one of the reasons you've got that sheet of paper, because it will help fill out some of the details of that as to the events that are going to happen. I want to now focus on our time at the judgment seat of Christ. And I don't know about you, brothers and sisters, but we shouldn't fear the judgment. But, I can't help have a little bit of sensitivity. Are you like that? Yeah. I think we're all like that. So we want to point out why we shouldn't fear the judgment. That's where we're going to be heading sessions next day or so. Why we shouldn't fear the judgment. We've got the faith. If we've made the commitments, if we're doing the right thing, and we're doing our best, none of us are going to be perfect until that time. But God's interested in motivation. He's interested in direction. He's interested in what really is in the engine room of our lives. That's what he's interested in. There is a plain in front of Mount Horeb that's quite large, in which 2 million Israelites gathered under Moses, came out of Egypt. Some of you stood in that plain? I was there in 2015. Stood before Mount Horeb. It's a chilling experience, I can tell you. So, the photo that you're going to see is taken from that plain. And, you see it on here, but if you look very carefully right down the base of Mount Horeb, and you see sort of what looks like mounds there, that's what Israel put 2,500 years ago. They were instructed to build mounds before Mount Horeb so that animals couldn't get up to the mountain and holy. See? So it's an awe-inspiring place, is Mount Horeb. And we're going to go there, brothers and sisters, after the resurrected are taken there. We're going to join them there. That's why I want you to come now to the next passage that we're going to consider in some detail. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And the apostle, of course, is writing to a very young ecclesia. It is likely that they had been in the truth, as we say, for about 5 months. That's not very long, is it? And some of them had already been put to death. because of their beliefs that had already been persecuted and put to death. So they had people who had freshly been put in the grave. That's why he writes this section of Scripture. He says there in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and at verse 13, he says, "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him." A couple of important words here. That word bring in the Greek, ago, means to lead or to lead along as a general leads an army, which is exactly why they're there. Going to become part of Yahweh Sabaoth. He who will become armies. It's about the preparation of the army that will clean up this world. And the other word, of course, prevent, is an ancient English word. It's the Greek word phthano. It means to come before, and the diaglott correctly, and other translations correctly translate it, precede. What it's telling us, of course, is that those who are asleep in our Lord will know that he's in the earth first, for you and I, who might be alive and remain, know that. We'll find out soon enough, but they will know first. So what he's saying is, they've got an advantage. We wouldn't look at it that way, would we? He says they've got an advantage. And Paul said, didn't he, to Corinthians, he said, really, if you ask me, I'd prefer to be dead, and as it were, with Christ. Because the next moment, I'll be awake at the resurrection, face to face with my Lord. But men don't look at it that way, do they? Nobody wants to die, unless, of course, you've had enough. So, here's the apostle encouraging those who had lost their brethren. And he goes on to say this. He says, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout." Now that word there, self, in the Greek is autos. We get automatic from it. The Greeks had many gods, right? They had many gods. Mount Olympus has got 48 peaks. Did you know that? We had 48 gods. Mount Olympus. So the Greeks were, I didn't have any god that they thought was prominent enough to be standing by himself. But our Lord, himself. And we're going to see him face to face. We're going to have to face him in judgments, brothers and sisters. And it goes on to say, he will come with a shout. That word shout is kalousma in the Greek. It means to put in motion by word or command. It's a call or a summons, a shout or a command which assembles all at once. I used to use it on the galleys, when the man who controlled the rowers would say, "You ready? Row, row." So the angels will go out and do their work. Graves will be opened, and those who sleep in our Lord come forth. Then he talks about coming with the voice of the archangel. Now, look, it'd be lovely if we had time to go back and have a look at some of these passages that he's actually referring to here. He's actually referring, of course, to Michael the archangel and to his role when they came out of Egypt. In Exodus 23, verses 20 to 21, we're told about Michael when Yahweh says to his people through Moses, "Don't vex him, for my name is in him. He will not pardon your transgression." You know what that means? It means that Michael could forgive or condemn sin, which is why Christ is called Michael in Daniel 12, verse 1. He has the authority now taken over from Michael, the archangel, to forgive or condemn sin. So that's why the archangel is used there. He's coming as a judge. Then we read this. Take you back to Leviticus 25. Can I do that? This is an important one, really important one. Leviticus 25. Because this is about the trumpet, the single trumpet that was blown on the Day of Atonement every 50 years. So you might have heard this once in a lifetime. If you got to a ripe old age, you might hear it twice in a lifetime. Most only once. You and I are going to have it only once. A single trump. Because when you look at the Greek that is used here, Literally, it means a trump, just one trumpet. In Leviticus 25, you read about that in verses 8 to 10. And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of the 7th Sabbath of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then shalt thou cause, look at the language, the trumpet, the single trumpet, the trumpet of the Jubilee. Now, how would that be heard throughout the land? Well, you see, one man in the central position would blow the trumpet. Some chap way over in the hills hears it. Oh, it's my turn. He would blow the trumpet, and so it would go throughout the whole land. Sound of the one trumpet. That word trumpet there, of course, is shofar. It's a ram's horn trumpet. Of the Jubilee, that word has the idea of loudness or clamour. So it's the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall he make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. This is why we believe, brothers and sisters, that the resurrection is going to occur on the Day of Atonement. It's pretty obvious why Paul's quoting this, isn't it? The resurrection will occur on the Day of Atonement. How long after we're taken, we don't know. Be nice today, but we don't know. We'll have to find out. He goes on to say this in verse 10. And ye shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty, so there's freedom involved, throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, that is, his inheritance, and ye shall return every man unto his family. So those who are asleep in Christ, brothers and sisters, are going to return to their rightful family. Yeah. The truth, the family of the truth. And they're going to return to their inheritance in Abraham, Abraham's seed. What a day that will be, eh? That's why the apostle in 1 Thessalonians 4 makes reference to that trumpet. So coming back, let's move on here. Press the right button, it might move. In verse 17, what we have there is the apostle summing up 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 17. Then, he says, we which are alive and remain shall be caught up. By the way, there's no indication of that word of going anywhere. Not up. Because when you look at that word, caught up, it's harpazo. Means to snatch, to seize, to take hold of forcibly. Now that's the word that's used when Philip is grabbed from the wilderness and dumped 40 kilometres away in Ashdod. Right? Same word. And we'll talk a bit about that in a moment. So we which are alive and remain, probably most of us in this room, we would hope, we'll see, are caught away together with them. You notice I put a line through the definite article before the word clouds and the definite article before the word air. You can cross it out. There's no definite article in the Greek. So it's in clouds, and we know what clouds represent. Clouds are a symbol of a multitude, aren't they? Hebrews 12:1, you could quote Ezekiel 38 verse 9 and verse 16. It tells you the same thing. It's a multitude. And the word meant to meet the Lord in the air. It's a very important word to Greeks. It actually meant to them to go out to meet a very important dignitary that was coming your way. Which is exactly where we're going. Meet a dignitary, the greatest, apart from God himself, the greatest dignitary in the universe. That's where we're going, brothers and sisters, to meet him. So, the area. To meet the Lord in air doesn't mean to go up in the sky. It means to be involved with him in his government, because that term is used through the scriptures of governing regions. Ephesians 2 tell you. So the aerial is the place of government of the age to come. It's about being involved in the rulership of the world. Well, why wouldn't you comfort one another with those words, says the apostle in verse 18. And we need to do that. Now, comfort one another with those words. So, some examples of model transfer, just while we're on that point. Remember I said to you that when Philip was taken away from the eunuch in Acts chapter 8, verses 39 and 40, it says he was caught away. That's that word, harpazo. So don't expect to be catching a A380 to the judgment seat. You're not going that way. And you won't even know the journey. You won't even perceive the journey. Ask Philip when you see him. Philip, did you enjoy the landscape? And did you enjoy the beaches along the shore of the Mediterranean as you were taken from Gaza to Ashdod? He said, what are you talking about? That's how the angels get backwards and forwards from our Father in heaven. He's somewhere in the middle of this. We don't know exactly where. Well, the nearest star is 4 light years away. That means if you travel 186,000 miles per second for 4 years, you get there. That's the nearest star. The angels go backwards and forwards probably several times a day, at least twice a day, to the Father. That's spiritual. We've got no concept, have we? We've got no concept of that. But nothing's impossible to God. And so we'll be lifted from where we are, and the next moment, our feet will be standing in the soil before Mount Horeb. And we won't be alone. There'll be a lot of people there with us. And those who have been raised from the dead will be first. What a reunion that will be, brothers and sisters. So, in verse 26, he was directed to Gaza to meet the Ethiopian eunuch, and then he was transported that 32 kilometres from the wilderness to Ashdod. What about the next example? We say consider Enoch and Elijah. Similar things happen. What about the next example here of model transfer of the disciples? Remember the record of John 6? They were in the ship, in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. It was being rocked in a wild storm. The Lord comes in, he gets into the vessel, and the record says they were immediately at the land whither they went. Really? 13 men in a boat and plonked at Capernaum, the city of comfort? How did that happen? Well, just like it's going to happen to you and me. Shifted from where we are here, the presence of Christ at the judgment seat. So, we could talk a lot about that, but we're not going to do that. And there they are, immediately at the land whither they went. What I'd like to do then on the back of that is just to summarise what we've considered thus far, particularly here from 1 Thessalonians 4. So let's just have a look and see what the Apostle's saying here in this text, the order of events as we've read them. The living saints will not precede the dead. The dead will know that Christ's in the earth before we do. He will return with a shout or a command that will awaken the dead. He will come with the authority of the archangel to forgive or condemn, to invite in participation or to banish. The dead raised, he will gather the living with them into a place of judgment, and then he will grant a reward to the faithful, rulership in the kingdom at his side. And as the Apostle says, so shall we ever be with the Lord. So that's a summary of what's contained in that section of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I want you to come, if you wouldn't mind, to 1 Peter chapter 4. This is a passage that's very helpful in relation to responsibility. It's also very helpful in relation to resurrection. In verse 17 of 1 Peter 4, the Apostle makes this statement. For the time, he says, is come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, by which he means, brothers and sisters, that all of us are going to need divine grace. No one's going to go to the judgment seat beating their chest and saying, you owe me life, are they? We're all going to need the outpouring of divine mercy, and the judgment process is going to reveal some pretty big gaps in our life. Why didn't you do this? Doesn't mean you're going to be condemned for it. You'll be humbled by it. And the righteousness of God will be declared at judgment seat. And we'll be humbled, as Brother Roberts rightly says, we shall approach Christ to be waved to the right, hopefully, as sheep, as humble, forgiven sinners. No human pride. And so he says, if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? So there's some very important terms in there. So let's see if we can work these out. As Brother Thomas says, there are saints and there are sinners. There's a brilliant section in Eureka Volume 1 on that, by the way. We're either saints or we're sinners. And on the group of saints, you've got two classes. You've got righteous saints and you've got ungodly saints. That's why that word ungodly is there. Ungodly means you're not living a godly life. So, these on this side of the equation are responsible to judgment because they are in covenant relationship. Right? They have a relationship with God. They're held responsible. On the other side, you've got those who are sinners, but they've not committed. Right? These are those who have not been baptised. They've not committed, but they know they should have. They are held accountable. Now, you might say, well, what's the difference between responsibility and accountability? Well, there's a big difference. If I make you responsible for something, I expect some outcomes. I want results. But if you don't commit to it, but you should have, I'm going to ask you why you didn't. It's like the man who doesn't have a wedding garment. Remember him? Matthew 22, verse 11. Friend, says Christ, friend, how came you in hither not having a wedding garment? Why aren't you baptised? You knew you should have been. Why aren't you baptised? He wasn't a friend, because he wants him to be friend, but the guy doesn't make the right decision. Right? So he is a sinner. He's an enlightened sinner. So when you look at this chart, you've got another group down here, the unenlightened, and that's the bulk of humanity. They're not accountable. So who's going to be at the judgment seat? All of those down by that line, dotted line. Okay? They're all going to be there. Now, if I've done this study in North America, and in North America, of course, there is a group of Christadelphians who don't believe that the unbaptised will be at the judgment seat. So by this time, I'm getting some rotten tomatoes, right? But it's true. There will be people there who are enlightened sinners. The unenlightened, of course, have no hope. Now, the reason I'm here is because of the end of this chapter, 1 Peter 4. Read on with me. We've got one verse to go. It's verse 19. Wherefore, let them that suffer according to the will of God, because you see, Peter's writing to people who were being persecuted. Nero was using them as torches in his backyard when he was driving his chariots around. He would dip them in tar, stick them on a stake and light them up. Or they were being thrown to the wall, to the wild animals, spewed out or coming out as dung. Right? You think about that. He said, look at the language he uses. This is brilliant. He says, wherefore let them that suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing as unto a faithful creator. He can recreate. He knows every hair on your head. Doesn't matter where you might have disappeared. Doesn't matter. Not one hair will be missing. In my case, it won't be very much a problem. You got the point? He's a faithful creator. He's going to recreate. People you knew, you put in the ground, see them again. They'll come out of the ground minus what took them there, whatever that might have been. And then you're going to see them as immortals, and they'll be in their mid-30s like Christ, at the peak of your powers, as it were. your mid-30s. That's how Christ was immortalised. That's how we're going to be immortalised. We are described, the angels are described as young men. We're going to be the angels of the future age, brothers and sisters. Won't it be terrific? Be back when you're like 35. I'm looking at Fran. Brothers and sisters and young people, I want to take you now to the faithful Creator. We want to talk about resurrection. This is why we read from 1 Corinthians 15. So come with me to that chapter, 1 Corinthians 15. Now, the Greek word that is rendered resurrection in the New Testament is anastasis. Others will say anastasis. Well, we don't argue about that. But anastasis, as I say it, means a rising up, a standing up from the root anastemi, means to stand up or to cause to rise. It's used 42 times in the New Testament. It's translated 39 times resurrection, once rising again, once raised to life again, and once that should rise. And resurrection is therefore the standing up of dead ones. Now that's exactly the phrase that Brother Thomas uses in anastasis. He comes to look at verse 42. We'll get there in a minute. It's the standing up of dead ones. The resurrection will be a virtual recreation of former beings into exactly the same mental, moral and physical state that they possessed prior to their death. That's why we read 1 Peter 4:19. Now, I often visit cemeteries. The wise man Solomon said it's a good idea. Better to be in the house of mourning, he said, be in the house of pleasure. We should take our children into cemeteries for that very reason. We go around looking for all the young kids who died. Just to remind them that we're mortal. We're going to end up there one day. You've got to get your act together. Make sure that you're ready. Brother H.P. Mansfield's grave. But the one that I really want to show you is this one, two graves. I was baptised in February 1967. We're about to go to a youth conference in Perth in 67, in May. There was a Rathmines Bible School the week before. Two of my friends, Phil King, 19, Ian Robinson, both baptised. Grant Jolly in the backseat of a vehicle at 6 a.m. in the morning after a drive right through the night, smacked a huge gun. They were both killed. Grant was seriously injured. One baptised. When you watch young people, when you watch two of your friends lowered into the... If that doesn't impact you, then nothing will. I go to these graves when I'm in Adelaide. I try and go around the time of the Day of Atonement, hoping that the ground might have been disturbed. One day it will. I'm going to talk about this is pretty close to all of our hearts. It's even closer to some others. So here we've got resurrection from the dead. Now, let me just warn you, there's a little bit of technicality here, 1 Corinthians 15. But let me say this. In the book called Anastasis, written in 1866, Brother Thomas got 98% of what he wrote right, but he got one thing wrong. He suggested that the nature of the resurrected body would be like Adam before the fall. 2 years later in Eureka, written in 1868, volume 3, he corrected that. And if you have a look at my notes, you'll see there's a whole explanation of that. You know, he's a bit like you and me, you can get everything right the first time, as long as you get it right the last time. That's important. But because of that, brothers and sisters, it's a sad thing. Some brethren have said, no, don't want that. But he got it right, and I want to show you he got it. Give you the detail of that. So, what have I got on the screen there? 3 views on sown. There are three views in our Christadelphian writings on what sown means. You see that word, if you're in 1 Corinthians 15, look at verse 36. Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not given life except it die. There are those who say that we are sown when we are born into a state and an environment related to corruption, dishonour, weakness, and to things natural. There are those who say that when the dead body is buried in the ground, we are sown. And there are those who say that we are sown when we are called forth from the grave at the resurrection. So which of those are right? 2 or 3 in their place, as we're going to say. In their place. And this is the thing that Brother Thomas reveals in Anastasis. So let's move on to have a look, examination of what we read here. Verse 35, he says, but some man's going to say, because the whole chapter in that direction, and the Greeks didn't believe. Some of the believers in Corinth didn't believe that God could recreate. They thought once you were born back to dust, at the end of it. Paul says, well, what are you in the truth for? What's the point of it? He says that some men will say, how are the dead raised up? Now, that word raised is very important. Because it doesn't mean to resurrect. Right? We would use that word of resurrection. The dead are going to be raised. Doesn't mean to be resurrected. It means to rebuild, cause to exist. So this is talking about the transition from mortality to immortality. How are the dead rebuilt? And to or for, Brother Thomas correctly translates, to or for what body do they come forth? In other words, what's the last end here? What's the objective? Which body are they going to, when the task is done? And then he says, look, creation, nature teaches this. Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened or given life, except it died. Now, this is a very important word. This word sowest, used 3 times, you can see it there, verses 36 and 37. It's the Greek word spiro. Note this. It is used here in the active voice, which is about the act of sowing. And the explanation is then given in verse 37. And that which thou sowest not that body that shall become when the process is finished, but bare or naked grain, as that word is. Bare or naked grain. I'm going to have to go back here, I'm a little bit ahead of myself. It may come to the word some other grain, but God giveth it a body as it hath pleased him, or as it is according to his will. And his will was expressed in Genesis 1. That every seed would bring forth fruit after its own kind. So what happens when you put grains of wheat in the soil? Do you get barley? No. You get wheat, don't you? You put in corn, you don't get tomatoes. You get corn. If you bury a mortal body, what do you get? When it comes out, you get a mortal body. Simple as that. We'll see this illustrated in a moment. So God laid down the rule. Whatever you put in the ground is what you get out of it. Get out a mortal body when the resurrection occurs. Now this word spiro, as I said, occurs 3 times in verses 36 and 37, all in the active voice. And in the active voice, if you go to really good lexicons like the Dell and Scott, which Brother Thomas was using, by the way, pretty hard to get nowadays. I think it's online. Get it. It means to scatter seed or to sow seed. What that's talking about, of course, is the burial of a dead body. Just like when you dig up the ground, put seed in it and you cover it over. It's exactly what we do. Bury a dead body. Now, let's come along a little way, because you see this word spiro occurs 4 times again in verses 42 to 44. Now, when you read down, verses 39 to 41 of 1 Corinthians 15 are an aside, like a parenthesis. You He's going to explain the difference between the quality of flesh, etc. So you can go straight down to verse 42 without interruption. And the very first line of verse 42 is critical, as you're going to see. But in this passage from verses 42 and to 44, you're going to find this word spiro used again. But it's in the passive voice. And there's a difference in the passive voice. The passive voice is about the results of sowing. And waiting for this. Oh, here we go. The word in the Greek, if you look at the text, is spiritia, same basic word, but a suffix on it. In the passive voice, it means to spring or to be born, according to Liddell and Scott's lexicon. What's this a reference to? Well, it's the results of sowing. It's about the resurrection of the body. Now, you might say, well, hang on. This is just about word and lexicon. It's not. Have a look at the first sentence of verse 42. Look at that first sentence of verse 42. So also is the resurrection, there's our word anastasis, of the dead. A literal translation, as Brother Thomas has, would be this. So also is the standing up of the dead ones. So it's not about burial. It's about resurrection. So therefore, we're going to have to make a few changes to the way we translate what follows. It's not putting a body in the ground. It's about bringing a body out of the ground, standing up the dead ones. So we're going to have, in a moment, a good look at that. So here's our words. So is the standing up of the dead ones. And then you've got this sentence. It is sown in corruption. It is raised in corruption. Now, Brother Thomas says that this word sown here in the passive voice means to spring or to be born. He translates it is sprouted. Okay, it is sprouted. It springs forth. Then you've got the other word here, raised. And that word raised is that word agyro with a suffix on it. It means to raise up, to rebuild, to cause to exist. So it's about the end of the process. So when you look at a chart on this matter, this is how it should read. This is the pattern of contrast between mortality and immortality. When the body comes out of the grave, it comes out mortal, just like you put it in. It springs forth, though, from the grave in corruption, mortal, but it is caused to exist when the nature is changed into incorruption. Then you've got the next step. Here we go. It springs forth into dishonour. It's built again, caused to exist in glory. It springs forth in weakness, built into power. What am I doing here? It springs forth a natural body. It's caused to exist a spiritual body. Brother Thomas got exactly right. As he often does. Right? He got it exactly right. So when you read this chapter again, just remember that. This word sown, which implies putting something in the ground, doesn't mean that. It's passive voice. It's what you get from sowing. The results of sowing. And when that body comes out, it comes out in a state like it was put in. But there's a process, and that process, of course, is the judgment process, isn't it? Let's have a look at this process that's revealed here in 1 Corinthians 15. There are 3 stages of resurrection revealed here. You've got the seed body down. You've got the seed body, the naked kernel referred to back there, you remember, in verse 37. The naked kernel, that's put in the ground. That's death. Then you've got a sprout body. It pops up out of the ground. This is the resurrection. It's out of the ground. but it's in the same state of mortality as it was put in. Then you've got another step in the process, which is the judgment seat. Gather my saints unto me. If you go to the right hand, you've got the third state. You've got the full glory of the raised body. Raised used in the sense of being paused to exist. The end of the process. What he says in verse 35, 36, he says, to what body do they come forth? Here it is. What a day. Day that will be, brothers and sisters. Well, let's conclude this study here this afternoon in Daniel chapter 10, shall we? Very quickly. Daniel 10 is magnificent. It gives you a picture of exactly what's going to happen at the judgment seat. Daniel's going to go through a typical death, resurrection and glorification. And you know when this is going to happen? This is happening to him? In the year he dies. Yeah. So before he dies, God says, hey Daniel, this is what's going to happen to you. As a pattern for all those that will be raised from the dead. So let's have a look at what we've got here in Daniel chapter 10. Verses 8 and 9 are about Daniel's death. He's just seen the vision of the man of the one, by the way, Christ and the saints in glory. And verse 8 says, therefore I was left alone, which you are when you die, and saw this great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me into corruption, and I retained no strength. He's dead. How do we know that? We'll read the next verse, verse 9. Yet heard I the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face toward the ground. I don't know about you, but I don't sleep comfortably on my face. Anyone sleep comfortably on their face? Most unusual, isn't it? Yeah, because it's meant to prefigure his death. He's flat on his face, on the ground. He's dead, spiritually speaking, typically speaking. He's going to go through the process, and he wasn't too far away from it. What comes next? Well, let's have a look at verses 10 and 11 and verse 15. Verse 10. And behold, an hand touched me, just like the angels go forth to raise the dead, which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of my hands. He's been reformed, hasn't he? And wouldn't it be terrific if raised from the dead, and even when the angel arrives at your door, wouldn't it be terrific if you heard these words? And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved. I think you'd have some idea of where you're going to be at the judgment seat, eh? I think you'd have a slight degree of confidence. A man greatly beloved. Understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright. Yeah, that's anastasis, isn't it? The standing up of dead ones. Stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. You know why that's got to happen, brothers and sisters? What do you reckon men like Esau and the wicked men who will be at the judgment seat would be like if you gave them back their full strength when they're raised from the dead? They'd be running around making trouble, wouldn't they? It's not going to be like that for those who are raised from the dead. They're going to be like Daniel was. They're going to be alive, but they won't have any strength and they can't talk. Because when you read down in verse 15, it says this, and when he has spoken such words unto me, I set my face toward the ground and I became dumb. You can control people when they're like that. That's why the dead will be raised like that. Can't talk until the angel comes into their tent. Then they'll talk. Where am I up to? This is 16 and 17. And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men, touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spake. He's at the judgment seat. Now, we're going to talk in our sessions about us, judgment seat, and that's exactly what we're going to have to do. We've got to talk. So, verse 16 goes on to say, I opened my mouth and spake and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? For as for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. But, verse 18 tells us the next stage. He's accepted and immortalised. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me. Brothers and sisters and young people, when your nature is changed, judgment seat, you will feel a strength that you know nothing about today. Even those vital young people that I saw last night. All right? Vibrant, like I used to be when I was your age, by the way. No more. You'll never have experienced anything remotely like what immortals feel. No weakness, no bias, no tendencies to eat. Nothing like that. Gone. He strengthened me. Look at verse 19. And he said, O man, greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be unto thee. Be strong. Yea, be strong. The time that's going to be. Later on today, brothers and sisters and young people, we'll have a look at being made manifest at the judgment seat of Christ. And for those of you who are interested in following up on the 50-year period, I would really encourage you to have a look at chapter 2 of the Temple of Ezekiel's prophecy. If you're not convinced by that, I think you can convince you. I'm going to keep quiet. Right.